1934, year of chaos and change in Cuba. The year 1934 was one of deep political instability in Cuba, marked by the aftermath of the Revolution of September 1933, the continued influence of the military in the government, and constant changes in leadership. In this context, several individuals stepped onto the political stage and made significant contributions to the events that unfolded during this tumultuous year. One such figure was Manuel Marquez Sterling, who played a pivotal role in this chaotic yet transformative period in Cuban history. In this video, we'll delve into the life and times of Manuel Marquez Sterling, exploring his background, contributions, and the significant events of 1934 that shaped Cuba's path toward stability and sovereignty. So join us as we uncover the story of Manuel Marquez Sterling and his role in navigating the complexities of Cuban politics in 1934. Background: the fall of President Machado and the rise of Batista, 1933. By 1933, the situation in Cuba was reaching a boiling point. Decades of Machado's iron-fisted rule had left the population disillusioned and desperate for change. Widespread discontent was brewing across the country. In August 1933, students took to the streets of Havana in protest against Machado's regime. Their demands echoed the sentiments of many Cubans who yearned for democracy, economic justice, and an end to Machado's authoritarian rule. As the protests intensified, a general strike broke out, bringing the Cuban economy to a standstill. Workers from various sectors united in their opposition to Machado, amplifying the pressure on his government. Sensing the growing unrest, Machado attempted to quell the uprising by deploying the army. However, this move only escalated the situation further. On August 12, 1933, the armed forces sided with the protesters, forcing Machado to flee to Miami. Without the military support, Machado's position became untenable. On August 13, 1933, he resigned and left Cuba, marking the end of his tumultuous 8-year presidency. With Machado gone, a power struggle ensued among various factions seeking to fill the leadership void. Several provisional governments were established, each struggling to maintain stability amid continued pressure from protesters and labor groups. Amidst this turmoil, a group of non-commissioned officers led by Sergeant Fulgencio Batista seized power on September 4, 1933, installing Ramón Grau San Martín as president. The new government, known as the Gobierno de los 100 Días, 100 Days government, aimed to address the grievances that had fueled the revolution and restore order to the nation. The 100 Days government, reforms intentions, September 1933, January 1934. Grau's government wasted no time in implementing significant reforms. These changes, primarily introduced by the Secretary of the Treasury, Eduardo Chibas, addressed long-standing issues that had contributed to the downfall of Machado's regime. One of the most impactful reforms was the introduction of the 8-hour workday. This measure aimed to improve the quality of life for Cuban workers by ensuring they received adequate rest and reduced working hours. Prior to this reform, workers often endured long hours with little regard for their well-being. Additionally, the government implemented minimum wage laws, recognizing the importance of fair compensation for labor. These laws aimed to alleviate poverty and ensure that workers could meet their basic needs. Furthermore, the gobierno conceded some demands from labor unions, including the right to organize and bargain collectively. This marked a departure from the anti-union stance of previous administrations and signaled a commitment to improving labor relations. These progressive reforms, while popular among many Cubans, did not come without controversy. Tensions grew between the reformist government and conservative sectors, particularly among wealthy landowners and business owners who felt that the changes were detrimental to the economy. Despite these challenges, the government pressed forward with its agenda, determined to fulfill its mandate and address the root causes of the nation's instability. January 1934. Batista consolidates power and political upheaval. as the government worked to implement its reforms, political maneuvering and pressure from military leaders, particularly Batista, forced Grau to resign in January 1934. Grau's departure left a power vacuum that raised concerns about the future direction of the country. Following Grau's resignation, Carlos Hevia briefly served as provisional president from January 15 to 18. However, his tenure was short-lived as he resigned after only 3 days in office. This rapid succession of leadership only added to the instability and uncertainty plaguing the nation. On January 18, 1934, amid the ongoing political turmoil, Manuel Marquez Sterling was appointed interim president of Cuba. Despite the gravity of the situation, he faced the daunting task of restoring order and stability to the country. Although Marquez Sterling's appointment brought a moment of calm, it lasted for only about 6 hours. That same day, he stepped aside to facilitate a more stable transfer of power, demonstrating his commitment to the greater good of the nation. Later on January 18th, Carlos Mendieta assumed the presidency, with Batista retaining real control as the army's chief. This shift in leadership marked a turning point in Cuba's political landscape, setting the stage for a new era of military influence in governance. Under Mendieta's administration, the reforms initiated by the gobierno gradually lost momentum, raising questions about the future of progressive reforms in Cuba. The conservative elements within the country saw an opportunity to roll back or slow down the reforms they opposed, shifting the balance of power in their favor. U.S. influence and the end of the Platt Amendment. Amidst this internal upheaval, the United States, a significant player in Cuban affairs, closely observed the political developments. The U.S. government, under pressure from both domestic and international spheres, recognized the need to reevaluate its approach to Cuban sovereignty. This growing sentiment was driven by a desire to normalize relations with Cuba and acknowledge its status as an independent nation. Recognizing this shift in sentiment, the United States took a significant step toward ending its prolonged involvement in Cuban politics. In May 1934, both countries signed the Treaty of Relations, formally repealing the Platt Amendment, which had allowed the United States to intervene in Cuban affairs since 1903. This amendment had been a contentious issue for decades, symbolizing the limitations imposed on Cuban sovereignty. By repealing the Platt Amendment, the United States demonstrated a willingness to relinquish control and recognize Cuba's independence. However, it's important to note that while the Platt Amendment was officially repealed, the United States continued to exert considerable influence over Cuban politics and economy through various means. Economic ties and historical precedents ensured that the U.S. remained a powerful force in shaping Cuban affairs, even in the absence of formal interventionist policies. Conclusion. The year 1934 proved to be a pivotal moment in Cuban history. It was a year marked by profound political instability, far-reaching reforms, and a significant step toward Cuban sovereignty. The tumultuous events of this year, including the fall of Machado's regime, the rise of Batista, and the eventual repeal of the Platt Amendment, had lasting repercussions for the country's future. The reforms introduced by the government, such as the 8-hour workday, minimum wage laws, and recognition of labor unions, represented a progressive shift in labor rights and social welfare. However, these reforms also sparked tension and opposition from conservative sectors, contributing to the ultimate downfall of the government and the consolidation of military influence under Batista. Despite the setbacks, the ideals of social justice and democracy continued to resonate among the Cuban people, laying the groundwork for future movements advocating for civil rights and national sovereignty. The repeal of the Platt Amendment, while symbolic, represented a crucial step toward Cuban independence and self-determination. It marked the official end of U.S. interventionism and acknowledged Cuba's status as a sovereign nation. However, it's essential to acknowledge that despite the repeal, the United States continued to hold significant sway over Cuban politics and economy. Furthermore, the contributions of individuals like Manuel Marquez Sterling, though often overlooked, were instrumental in guiding the country through turbulent times. His commitment to public service and willingness to serve in positions of authority, even under challenging circumstances, exemplified his dedication to Cuba's well-being. Marquez Stirling's actions reflected the broader aspirations of the Cuban people for stability, progress, and self-determination. In conclusion, 1934 was a pivotal year in Cuban history, characterized by profound political upheaval, social reform, and a step toward independence. The events of this year, including the fall of Machado's regime, the rise of Batista, and the repeal of the Platt Amendment, had far-reaching consequences for the nation's future. While the conservative forces ultimately gained the upper hand, the ideals of democracy and social justice continued to inspire generations of Cubans striving for a better future. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Cuban history. We've explored the tumultuous events of 1934, shedding light on the contributions of individuals like Manuel Marquez Stirling and the broader fight for democracy and independence. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more engaging historical content. Your support means a lot to us. Let us know in the comments what aspects of Cuban history you'd like to see covered in future videos. Stay tuned for more captivating stories from the past. Dedicated to my great Cuban friend Victor Caballero. Thanks for watching.